Hello, I'm Keith Luce with NCNK. On behalf of my colleagues Daniel Wirtz and Esther M., we welcome you to be a part of this, what will be a wonderful discussion with Ambassador Thomas Schäfer, who served in North Korea for a number of years on behalf of the country of Germany. Ambassador Schäfer, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you again.
So you have written, in my mind, a tremendous book. It's entitled From Kim Jong Il to Kim Jong Un, How the Hardliners Prevailed. So in reading your book, I appreciated your analysis, not only based upon your official meetings, but the anecdotes which you shared of your interactions with people throughout the country. This book, I believe, for quite some time will be an important contribution to the topic of North Korea. And I believe it will contribute to better understanding of life and realities within the North, in the power structure and otherwise. But let me ask you, how, in the beginning of the book, you suggest that the country is governed by a precarious collective. I mean, your statement, your assertion runs against the thought of many in the United States that Kim Jong Un, that the Kim family are absolute in their control of the country. So if you would please define for us, what is this precarious collective? And also, how do you define hardliners?
Okay. I, a collective is a group of leadership that is composed of party members, high party members, military, officials of internal securities, and the Kim family or Kim Jong Un, and perhaps some others. I don't know. I do not know the definition, any reliable definition. But I know it's. I assume it's a small, relatively small group of people. They often are descendants of so-called revolutionary families, that is, of people who fought together with Kim Il-sung and compose really the highest elite of North Korea. And within that group, there are differences of opinion, as is normal. I think the book, it is important for me to, it is perhaps the way to go about this question is first to state and find out what kind of differences of opinions there are and how they manifest themselves, and then to try to define who is behind which opinion, and then at the end try to define whether there is a consistent policy or a decider who governs it all, who gives the basic indication, or whether there are factions actually that fight against each other. And we can talk perhaps about it later on. I think it can be clearly established that there are differing opinions in the realm of economic policy, the control of the population, South Korea policy, the wider security policy. So it's actually, it comprises the whole range of important issues in North Korea. Hardliner is, I would say, is somebody who can be military, who can be party official, who is inclined to favor socialist planning of the economy, very restrictive measures of the population against the population, an aggressive policy towards South Korea, and a very concentrated and determined nuclear policy.
So as we consider the Trump administration and that administration's approach toward North Korea, uh, what was the strength of the hardliners? What was their level of input during that time? As you know, Kim Jong Un was willing to meet with President Trump, met with him more than once. The leader of North Korea also returned home empty-handed after those visits, no sanctions relief. To what degree did that reality feed into the position, the strength or not of the hardliners?
Well, I think that, look, I have been in North Korea the first time from 2007 to 10, and then again from 2013 to 18. And what I noticed, and I'm sorry, I have to explain it a little bit. What I noticed even during Kim Jong Il's reign, that there were differences of opinion, and as to economic policy, for example, even Kim Jong Il had to give in to the wishes, to the hardliners' wishes. For example, he was even called back. He had to renege on a position he had adopted together with the South Korean president during the second Korean summit in 2007, when they talked about and agreed in principle about South Korean investment in North Korea, and a couple of months later, an editorial in the three newspapers at the beginning of 2008 said that foreign investment would not be allowed. So Kim Jong Il at that time was reined in. There was opposition to what he had agreed upon with the South Korean president. Now, Kim Jong Il had a stroke in 2008, and he was physically weakened and politically weakened. And what we noticed starting in the summer of 2008 was a hardening of the policy across the board, that is South Korea policy, nuclear policy. There was the currency reform. The internal controls were tightened. And this was of course had to do with the succession plans. Kim Jong Un had to pay a price to the elite, to the hardliners, for accepting Kim Jong Un as successor. Now, after Kim Jong Il's death in 2011, at the end of 2011, we saw a further tightening, especially in nuclear policy, in the months right afterwards. We had the policy of parallel development. We had a new a new military doctrine. The Leap Day Agreement failed. The nuclear policy was written into the constitution even before that, but it was a quite a profound change towards the worse. Also, Kaesong in 2000, the industrial zone of Kaesong in 2013 was closed for a couple of months, which had happened for a couple of days before, only once in 2009, after Kim Jong Il's stroke. In 2013, of course, Jang Song-taek was executed, which I consider was a part of this power struggle between moderates and hardliners. And in 2013 and 14 and 15, we saw further indications of a power struggle, especially regarding South Korea. Now, in 2016, starting with 2016, I did not see any evidence anymore of a power struggle within the leadership. The hardliners the moderates were silenced. 2 two of their exponents, Kang Sok-ju, who had been the head of the International Department of the Central Committee, and Kim Jong Un, who was the head of the United Front Department in the party, had died, and really the also in the economic sense, there was a further solidification of conservative positions in the party. Now, those were the circumstances of the meetings between Kim Jong Un and Trump, and so I believe, and of course, in nuclear policy, the North Korean position was to do the research first and do not any talking until they had succeeded in developing missiles and nuclear arms. And they declared, of course, at the end of 2017 and then in 2018 that first they were close and that they had accomplished that task. And so it was to be expected, actually, that they would start talking again from this position of strength. And it was the position of the hardliners that had really they were in, and so that was the position Kim Jong Un had to represent with Trump. So I'm talking too much, sorry, but I think as a background, this is necessary. I believe that North Korea determined the agenda. They knew, when everybody else is willing to talk at all times, and Washington, as well as Seoul, as well as any other country really, has always been willing to talk to North Korea. So the schedule of when to talk and what to talk about is really Pyongyang's decision. And they decided, okay, after having finished the development of nuclear arms and missiles to a sufficient degree, at least, they would be talking. And now I believe that in Singapore, they had been quite successful. I think the meeting itself in Singapore and the meeting in Hanoi and the third meeting with Trump were a huge success for North Korea. They had other successes. They had the maneuvers were reduced and postponed. Human rights were not being dealt with in the United Nations as they had been before. So I think from their perspective, actually, they could be very satisfied with their policy, and really they had not given up anything, in my view.
All right, thank you. Let me just pause for a moment and suggest to our audience that if they have questions for Ambassador Schäfer, please submit those to the chat box. In that regard, as a follow-up, Ambassador, to something you just shared, Jean Lee asked, to what degree do you think that we're still seeing the ripple effects from the execution of John Song-Tek in terms of a power/purge struggle, and what that means for the economy and economic reform?
Well, I believe the economy has, of course, and I have not mentioned it before. We had, after the currency reform in 2009, which was failed and which really angered the North Korean population, there was a certain liberalization of the economic regime, and of course there were markets sprung up, but they have been maintained at a certain level, 400 plus, something like this in the whole country. I believe, and then there were in 2012 and 2013, there were certain attempts of economic reform in the agricultural sector, in the management system of industries, and in the special economic zones policy. Now, I think those were either those reforms stalled or they were rolled back. In agricultural policy, the change was quite minimal and I don't think has produced much result. In the management reform, I think it was never, let's say, carried out with the ultimate determination. But for example, Kim Jong Un never promoted it. He never, as far as I know, visited a factory under the new management style. But it was the factory managers who were told to assume this kind of reform, that is to use liberties they theoretically at least had, but they were told at the same time, if they did this, they had to assume responsibility for feeding and paying their workers as well. And so as the party has always remained in charge of appointing managers and also kicking them out of their factory, most managers, I believe, were very, very hesitant to assume that kind of new responsibility, and they knew that part of the party and leadership were actually against this reform. Now in 2016, we have, it was quite clear that starting mainly in 2016, we noticed renewed efforts to centralize the economy and to get the military sector under party control also, and to reinforce socialist planning. So I believe that actually that aspect of Jang Song-tek's policy, that is reforming to a certain extent the economy, has not advanced very fast. The second aspect that I linked to Jang Song-tek was the opening up policy to China mainly, and he was the man that handled relations with China, and his execution was an affront towards China as well. Now, after his execution in 2014 and 15, a slogan appeared in North Korea that said, "Stop dreaming the Chinese dream," and which really meant stop dreaming the dream of a better life, because that was what the population was dreaming about. And this was accompanied by stricter measures of population control, for example, and internal controls. So and of course the since then North Korea has insisted even more so, I believe, than before, in self-sufficiency and well, not wanting to depend on other countries, including China. Sanctions, of course, played a role in that, but I think the main part is really the ideological part. It's this old dream of being of future.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we're now beginning to receive some questions into the Q&A function. Mark Fitzpatrick says the following: just to make it clear, Ambassador, you assess that Kim Jong Un began his smile diplomacy in late 2017 because he had completed his nuclear forces, not because he was under severe sanctions and and not because he was under severe sanctions and threats of fire and fury. Your response, Ambassador?
No. I think it's a number of factors that are at play there. I said I believe that in 2012, when the policy of parallel development was discussed, I know that within the leadership there was opposition towards that policy, and one argument of the people against it said it's too expensive. And then the hardliners responded that well, actually, yes, it's true. We have to spend more money for some time during missile development. Mainly, it's mainly missile development that is expensive, but later on we will be able to save on the on military expenditure because we have the nuclear deterrent. And so actually in the long run it will pay off. uh, so I, and of course they calculated, I assume this, I do not know, but they have a very good grasp of let's say the other countries' reactions, and of course they assumed that there would be some tough sanctions and that they would suffer from it. And so I believe that yes, they want to get rid of the sanctions, but the uh, the most important, concerning the timetable, the most important decision was to keep up development until they had reached the weapons had until the North Korean military was satisfied with the development, and until they themselves felt they had they had made sufficient progress.
All right, thank you. Dr. Sighecker presents the following comment and questions. Ambassador Schäfer, thank you for your insights. You mentioned that hardliners exercised control after Kim Jong Il's death and months thereafter. You mentioned examples of this, including the loss of the Leap Day deal. And then Dr. Hecker goes on to say, it seems strange that you would blame the demise of the Leap Day deal on North Korea's hardliners when it appears quite clear that Washington walked away after a satellite launch attempt. So are you saying that Kim Jong Un was never serious about the Leap Day deal? Ambassador?
Well, first I would respond that I understand that the basics of the broad outlines of the Leap Day agreement were actually talked about during when Kim Jong Il was still alive, and the elements in the Leap Day agreement were the elements that had been in similar agreements before. That is a freeze, economic support, and I understand, and now I have not been in the negotiations, but from what I've was told is that the North Koreans knew exactly what would happen if they launched a so-called satellite, and so and I know also that there was not a single piece of paper signed, but actually two papers in parallel. So I realized the negotiations had left some had some voids. But still, I would classify the Leap Day agreement by its character, and I would argue that it's much more in line. It's actually similar to agreements made by Kim Jong Il. And now when they launched the satellite, they knew exactly that the Americans would walk away. And it was a deliberate decision, but obviously not a decision that Kim Jong Il would have taken, because why then would he have engaged in the negotiations in the first place? So I believe that what happened was that in April, the satellite, so-called satellite launch, was a decision by the hardliners. It was not Kim Jong Un's decision. Kim Jong Un at that time had hardly any experience in governing, and he was still learning in 2012, and he actually until 2013 he did not engage in he engaged in very little serious policy, it seems, from judging from his hesitancy to meet foreign leaders, at least.
Thank you, Ambassador. Bernard Seliger says, greetings, Ambassador Schäfer. Could you please comment on the current state of North Korea? Would you agree to the statement that the regime is currently quite happy with the self-isolation, which allows better control, or do you see that they will have to open up again due to increased problems in the economy due to the lack of imports?
Now, of course, I thank you. I have I left North Korea in 2018, so I'm a bit hesitant of commenting on the current state of affairs. But I would suspect that the hardliners, or a large portion of them at least, are quite happy with the current state of isolation. And I noticed that they have somebody has indicated already that the current status might last even much longer, even after the pandemic has ebbed down. Yeah, that's perhaps it. Thank you.
Thank you. For a moment, I'd like to go back to your book. We could spend hours pulling out sections of your book and asking for expanded analysis. But you've made reference today, you make a lot of reference in the book about this tug internally within the North, a tug that really crosses multiple areas, tug about policy between the DPRK and South Korea, tugs related to the DPRK in the United States. But I want to refer to your book where you discussed the North Korean response to assistance provided to flood victims in the 2007 timeframe. And you wrote, you say, after arrival, I learned that North Korea's relations with foreign countries were causing internal discussions in Pyongyang. In early September 2007, the North Korea media reported that the government had thanked foreign states, including Germany, for their help in supporting flood victims the month before. A matter of course, one would think, in North Korea. However, such a public expression of gratitude promptly led to rebuttals on the same day. A biting comment appeared in the party newspaper, Rodong Sinum, warning against outside help and cooperation. The imperialists, it was said, were peddling support only to achieve their sinister goals and bring death and destruction over North Korea. So does that example, those contrasting situations, do they really reflect a tug between factions in the North, or do they perhaps reflect a lack of coordination among the stovepipes in the North in terms of messaging in response to the assistance?
No, I think it really reflects a tug of war between the factions. And even before that, in 2005 and 2006, the hardliners had wanted to shut down the European humanitarian assistance, and the Europeans were encouraged to leave the country, and it was only after some time that a working solution had been found and they could stay. And afterwards also, even today, you will find quite often warnings in the newspapers against humanitarian aid, against foreign investment, in general, against the presence of foreigners. And those are the people that believe that any contact with a foreigner poses a danger to the regime. Another example, for example, is tourism. The South Korea had always wanted to organize excursions or day trips or 2-day trips to Pyongyang, but they were never allowed to visit Pyongyang. They were sent to the Diamond Mountains, yes, and there was talk, and to Kaesong for day tours, and I think 1 or 2 flights, or perhaps even more, to Paektusan, but never to Pyongyang. And the reason, of course, is that the North Koreans were simply afraid of hordes of South Korean well-humored tourists, well-fed tourists also, of the aspects of it, so that the North Korean population would be able to compare their life and their looks and their fashion to the South Koreans. Investment in 2007 is another topic, and as I said, investment was encouraged. Some people, or many North Koreans, wanted investment and still want investment in the provinces. Of course, they were always eager to attract German, for example, investment, but the hardliners in Pyongyang don't want it at all, or want to restrict it to special economic zones where there is no interaction, or as little interaction as possible, with North Koreans. The difference between the Chinese special economic zones and the special economic zone in the industrial zone in Kaesong, one of the differences is that the Chinese, at the beginning of the 80s, they founded these zones not only to earn foreign exchange, but also to experiment with, let's say, the Western way to do business and to produce. And so they learned a lot, and they asked the foreigners to put counterparts, Chinese counterparts, at their side, so that the Chinese could learn. In Kaesong, what happened was that there was no interaction between the North Korean women that worked there and the South Korean managers, but also the North Koreans never ever asked for any North Korean to work with the South Korean managers simply to learn management methods. So I think it's very clear concerning humanitarian aid and other sectors that there's a strong opposition within the leadership as to any contact with foreigners.
Speaking of any contact with foreigners, reminds me in your book about your reference to the issue of family reunions and how the North Koreans, especially the hardliners, oppose reunions because of the concern of pollution coming into the country, spiritual pollution, et cetera, coming into the country. Another issue, in addition to divided families of interest to a lot of Americans, relates to POW, MIA, human remains issues from the Korean War. There were several thousand Americans unaccounted for at the end of that war, to the credit of the Department of Defense, DPAA, and others, this continues to be a priority. But given your time in Pyongyang, uh, while this was an issue involving is and was an issue related to the US and the DPRK, is this something that ever came across your desk as relates to an issue? Were you aware of this issue? If so, Donna Knox and Rick Downs posed questions. Number one, what would be the hardliners' position with regard to the recovery and return of the remains of American servicemen who were killed during the war? And Rick Downs went on to say, how would you describe the leadership's position on renewing the joint mission to recover US UN remains, working in conjunction with the Americans and others on this front?
Well, I believe that the hardline, first, I have never had anything to do with it. And I talked with North Koreans about it sometimes, just asking them how they proceeded, but I was never involved, of course. Now, I believe that that is a field where there has been some progress, but it's simply because North Korea, for North Korea, it doesn't pose any of such dangers of spiritual pollution, because it's a subject they feel, let's say, they are not worried about too much, and they see, of course, that it's also a subject where they actually can give something to the Americans. So I think the prospects of working with them again on the recovery of further remains are not bad, probably.
All right, thank you. Roberta Cohen poses a question, comments on the issue of human rights. Roberta writes, were a human rights dialogue to take place in the future between North Korea and the United States, or between North Korea and other governments or the UN, which issues would you propose be raised? Are there any areas in which concessions might be expected? In 2014, after the Commission of Inquiry report, North Korea extended an invitation to the UN Special Rapporteur to visit, but placed unacceptable conditions on the visit. So, Ambassador, how do you envision any potential for progress in the area of human rights?
Well, I think that is. I believe first it's a very difficult subject. Of course, the North Koreans have always tried to present their willingness to talk about human rights as a as a position of as giving away something of substance, and they have asked in returns for substantial concessions. That is, so they use the question of human rights as a bargaining chip, if you want to. I think perhaps it's very hard to talk about it. I've tried sometimes to talk about prison camps, labor camps, for example, but I've never succeeded. Only in private, I once heard some North Korean whom I asked, he answered me, he became quiet, and he said, you know, those people are sent there only to die, the penal camps, and but he didn't elaborate. And so it's and officially, of course, they will simply react by saying this is an insult that you ask us that, and we are not willing to talk to, and they might even shut down the whole conversation. So it's very difficult. But I still believe that it's very important to talk about human rights, to raise the subjects and not to renounce it. I think what the position, for example, not to talk about human rights in the United Nations is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's the wrong message to the North Korean population, because they will learn about it, and they are being fed the narrative then that even the foreign governments don't deem human rights that important, so they see no need to talk about it. I think one has to explain to the North Koreans that human rights is a field where progress is possible and where progress would be honored. I believe, for example, that a certain relaxation of their internal rules and of their controls would, let's say, raise the willingness of other countries to engage with them further. So I cannot really pinpoint any subjects what to talk about: penal camps or prison conditions, etc., women's rights. But I think one should, in general, as a first step, simply insist on talking with them and try to explain them that this is actually an area that they might engage with benefit, which might bring benefits to them.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador Schäfer. And I should note that we're very pleased to also have with us Ambassador Wee Sung Lok from Seoul. He says, thanks to you for your informed analysis. And based upon your experience, what is the view of the hardliners towards South Korea, particularly on Seoul's role in the denuclearization talks?
Okay, I think one change that that occurred starting in 2012 with Kim Jong Un was a change in negotiating positions in the disarmament process. I believe that now, I don't know if Pyongyang has talked about the hostile policy since at least 2012, and in the years, but it was not clear to me for a long time what actually was the content of this hostile policy. Now, so I started asking people of various institutions, military and party officials, the foreign ministry, of course, and others. And so they were evasive, but one thing they all said, they said, well, it means the withdrawal of American troops, among other things. And so what I think one can clearly observe is that since with the starting of the reign of Kim Jong Un's reign, the objective, the main objective of the hardliners has become withdrawal of American troops and weakening of the link between Seoul and Washington. And this again is linked to their wish to reunify the country under North Korean terms, of course. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I answered the question well, but yeah.
Let's move on. We have a number of other questions. We have actually too many questions for our time, but we'll do the best we can. Andrew Yo poses the following. By 2016, markets have become an important means for making money for both ordinary North Koreans as well as party officials. I presume hardliners have also benefited from market activity, illegal or otherwise. Is the limiting of markets sustainable in the long run if this cuts an important channel of making money for the North Korean government, including hardliners?
I believe that the upsurge in markets happened first under Kim Jong Il's rule. Then there was an attempt to rein in markets in 2009 through the currency reform. And then there was a reopening of market and a further liberalization. But it's important, I believe, to observe the timing of this. And I haven't seen any positive development in the last years. And I think there was the markets developed in during the first years, even before and in the first years of Kim Jong Un's reign, but that the level of market activities, to me, that was our impression at least, had remained quite stable since perhaps 2014 or 15. In the military, I believe that part of the policy of parallel development was and part of the hardline policy was also giving the military new or further opportunities to gain money. Of course, they are the biggest force. They have been the biggest force in the construction sector and in fisheries since then, at least. And I think they have received economic privileges. I'm not sure. And I know, of course, also that some of them also engage in more or less legal private economic activities. I think one of the objectives of the party conference in 2016 was to get the military sector and its economy under the control of the party again. And so it was told to me at that time, for example, that the 5-year plan, or I don't remember what it was called, the 5-year plan adopted at that time specifically included the military. That is what I was said. So the party tried to establish a better control of the military sector at that time.
All right. Glenn Ford poses a question, which I believe will provide you with opportunity to expand upon some earlier remarks. Glenn writes, the North Korea Special Economic Zone for Germany was Hamhung-Hungnam in the chemical metallurgical industries, which is the second biggest city in the country, and Berlin sent a business delegation there. So why, if the North Koreans want to keep foreigners away from the people, would they allow such a delegation to visit? And as you know, Ambassador, we've seen this in other areas where the North Koreans have been selective in who they would allow in according to industry, according to a particular area of interest. So could you, how do you respond to this, to Glenn's question?
Well, there is no special economic zone for Germany. Of course, Hamhung has had special relations with Germany, with East Germany, because East Germany, after the Korean War, helps with reconstruction. Now, I've visited the provincial the Hamhung and talked with the governor and the man in charge of economy, and at that time, that was in 2014 or 15, and at that time they showed us, including a delegation that was with a delegation from Germany, and they showed us a piece of land outside the city, and that was supposed to be the special economic zone, and so they explained that Germany would not only have to bring in the machines, the machinery, and the capital, but also would have to build the infrastructure, the whole infrastructure. It was just plain fields. And the infrastructure bring in the markets. It would not be permitted to sell anything in North Korea, but would have to export anything. So the deal, the proposed deal at that time was for Germany to bring in capital, technology, know-how, markets, the risk, of course, and the North Korean contribution would be this piece of bare land and the workforce. So that was all there is to it. And I frankly do not know of any other special economic zone, a new one created in the last 10 years that has made any progress, except the ones, except Rason, evidently, and the ones close to Dandong.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. I'd like again to go back to your book. This topic relates to agriculture.
Yes.
You write that North Korea blames the country's climate, topography, and sanctions for the state of North Korean agriculture. In essence, these are excuses. The fundamental problem is the lack of incentives. The remedy is well understood in Pyongyang. The leadership, however, fears a weakening of political control. Therefore, it opposes the long-term allocation of land to farmers, the privatization of decisions on what to grow, the creation of private marketing channels, and the allocation of profits to individual farmers. For the leadership, maintaining control over the population takes precedence over an improvement of living conditions. So this was your observation as relates to agriculture. What I find fascinating is that in other areas, Pyongyang is willing to allow the development of an entrepreneurial class, people in certain parts of business, some factories, to actually make money. So how do you reconcile these two approaches within the North?
Well, I believe also the so-called management reform is quite restrictive, actually, and it doesn't really allow factories. It doesn't give a sound legal basis to factory managers to operate. So I've never seen any written framework for their about their working environment. Factory managers are appointed by the party. They were told, and that was the essence of the management reform. They were told that there would still be state plans, but they could, in addition to that, once having fulfilled the plan, they could embark on further production, but at their own risk, and they would take care of capital. They would need any input, resources, energy, and they would have to assume responsibility for their workforce. This, as far I understand, was allowed mainly in light industry, in the industrial sector, not in heavy industry. So light, we interpreted it as a way, actually, for the regime to get rid of the responsibility of feeding this segment of the population. But as the personnel control, the control of who's nominated, who gets promoted, etc., of factory manager remains with the party. They are very dependent on the party. The political leadership has never fully supported this reform. Full support would have meant, for example, a visit by Kim Jong Un to demonstrate and a call to engage in this policy, as Deng Xiaoping did with the special economic zones, for example, in China. Kim Jong Un has never done it, as far as I know. So it's one cannot, as a North Korean, I believe one cannot rely whether this policy is really a serious effort to provide freedom of decision to the factory managers or not. And I, as a factory manager, frankly, I would refrain from engaging it because it would be very dangerous, actually. So I don't see what you said. I don't see a contradiction between the restraint and the rolling back, really, of the agricultural reform initiatives that had started in 2012 and ended in the beginning of 2014, really, and the fate of the course of the management reform. Now, aside from that, of course, there's an element in the North Korean economy that is run by people with good connections. But I think one has to differentiate this from the management reform. That is, if you want to, that is based on good connections, corruption, etc. So that's a different matter, and that, of course, is working quite well and quite widespread.
So, Ambassador, speaking of good connections, Jonathan Corrado with the Korea Society asks the following: to what extent can the recent policy shift towards economic centralization be explained by the need to deliver benefits to elites? How important is gift politics, and does the involvement of the Donju in the economy make it more difficult?
I don't really know. I would suspect that, as I believe that the elite, who really has a say in determining the fate of the country, is very small. I assume that there's always enough money for them, and they live a lavish lifestyle. So but further than that, I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
All right. Well, Ambassador, for a final question, we can't let you go unless we talk about the Biden administration and foreign policy, and as related to North Korea. Jay Brannigan with the Lugar Senator writes, President Obama tried strategic patience. President Trump tried robust personal engagement. Neither seemed to work. What would work? What do you make of the Biden administration officials' comments so far regarding North Korea? So I'm going to be very kind here and ask and suggest that you don't have to answer both of Jay's questions unless you want. But at the end of the day, what would work in terms of the United States and North Korea, or in terms of achieving a peaceful resolution of issues, including denuclearization? What would work?
Well, perhaps a remark of course, no policy. It is true that no policy has worked. No American policy, but also no European policy. We have a minor role there, but we have this policy of as we call it, policy of critical engagement, which has also not worked. The Chinese policy has not worked. Basically, the international community has done the same. They have tried pressure and incentive, more or less, with varying degrees, of course. But those are the two elements. You can exert pressure, and you can try to offer incentives. Now, with the hardliners and from the North Korean side, that is important to understand. it's a long-term policy, and their long-term objective is not just regime change, but is also the reunification of the country. And this has always been a goal, and it's, I believe, much more of a goal for the hardliners than for moderates who are perhaps more interested in the promotion of the economy. And what would work is, I believe, or what has to be done is to maintain the pressure. That is, and to offer, maintain offering incentives. It's not much of an answer. A new element, I think, right now, could be for the American administration, as well as for the Japanese, as well as for the South Koreans, to offer. And for the South Korean, it's not new; they do it already. But I would probably simply offer to establish some sort of representation, permanent representation in Pyongyang, and of course receive, for example, a North Korean office in Washington, to establish a permanent American presence in North Korea. That would help. I'm not talking about diplomatic recognition, but I'm talking about simply a permanent presence to keep talking to each other, to learn about each other, and I think this perhaps in the long run would advance would help us to take a step on the way to a solution of the problem. But as long as the hardliners are in firm control of Pyongyang's policy, I see, frankly, that chances are slim. I see that the time works against North Korea, because the gap between China and South Korea on one side and North Korea on the other, the economic gap, will grow, and at the same time more information will seep into the country. So I think the discontent of the North Korean people will also increase. So I think the time is working against the North Korean regime, and it is simply a matter indeed of patience for the international communities to manage this time without any major eruption.
Ambassador, just to clarify before we sign off, what I thought I heard you say as you started your comments, your final comments, is that the hardliners in the North are in favor of regime change in the North. Did I hear you correctly?
No, I don't. I don't quite.
That's why I just wanted to make certain that we had clarification on that. That was my fault then.
But no, I'm sorry if I misspoke.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks to all of you who attended. My apologies to so many of you who asked questions. We were not able to cover all of those, but we are really pleased that you were with us. And again, the book is From Kim Jong Il to Kim Jong Un, How the Hardliners Prevailed. Thank you, Ambassador Schäfer, and have a good evening.
Thank you for hosting me. Thank you very much.